Okay. Ray Stein, Stein. I came from
Okay.
Erie, Pennsylvania originally. Have we started now?
Yes, we started.
Okay.
Tell me your story.
Okay. I had originally tried to join the Navy. I was at Penn State at the time and tried to join the Navy, which they rejected me for, but didn't have enough teeth, they told me. Anyways, after I'd gone through the induction services, and I ran into a friend at the induction center, and he wanted to ask me what I wanted to do. He happened to be a captain there, and I said, well, I had a chemical training. I'd like to use that if I can. Well, he sent me headed me for chemical warfare. And he said, but I'm going to send you out to Shepherd Field first, and that way you'll get 2 stripes, and that'll keep you out of KP. Anyways, after the basic training, which everyone went through, went out, and then I came back to Camp Seibert for chemical training. And while I was at Seibert, they screened the whole camp for a program called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. The whole idea was to keep the colleges open. They needed some students, so if you qualified, well, they let you go. So I was qualified for that program and ended up at the University of Pennsylvania in the chemical engineering course, which I was very happy to do at the time. And then as time goes along and the months, the war was not doing well at the time of the Battle of the Bulge. So they needed more manpower, so they closed down the college program. And it so happened to, before they had closed it down, well, they gave 100 of us a test. And we had no idea. They didn't tell us what it was for. So that was forgotten in a few weeks. Then when they closed it off, they took 50 of that 100, and I had to be one of the 50, and sent us to Oak Ridge. And there was no preamble to this. They didn't tell us what we were doing, but it so happened that the sergeant that was in charge of us to take us to Oak Ridge was from Clinton, Tennessee, which is right a few miles from Oak Ridge. He said, I don't know what you're going to do down there, but there's a big building project, and you're getting a good deal. So, well, that made us feel real good. So we came on down to and found out there was a pool called the SED, Special Engineer Detachment, and they put us in this pool. They needed technical help also because so many of the men had been in the Army or gone overseas. So after we were there a few days, we were surprised. One morning they told us to pack up our bags. We were leaving. No word what we're going to do. So we got in just an ordinary Army car, and there was about 3 or 4 in a car, and they took us back to Knoxville from Oak Ridge from the pool, and we thought we were going to the train station. Well, we went right by the train station, and here we go. Mystery. This is so much fun. We didn't know what we were going to be doing. And took us to the Farragut Hotel. More mystery. Ended up in a big room, looked like a dormitory, and there was more men there that we didn't know. Well, the group, we didn't know each other either. We all came from different colleges. So after there was a captain, or maybe it was a lieutenant, but he came in and he said, I want you to send home for your civilian clothes. More mystery. So we were really getting keyed up at this point. So we had about a week that we just were around Knoxville. They told us to try to be inconspicuous. Well, it's hard for the soldiers to be inconspicuous at that time, especially we didn't have anything to do. So we went to USO, which we were not supposed to be doing, but we just got bored doing nothing. So after our clothes came, then they got us together and said they were going to send us out to Oak Ridge 2 at a time to apply for a job. Okay, so we went out first day. Keith Kuchar and I went out. He's gone now, but they rejected us. They didn't have our name, didn't know anything about us. So we went back, called our captain, and he said, "Well, try again tomorrow." So we went back out the next day, and things were a little smoother then. Went to personnel department. They knew what we were supposed to do, so they had a plan for us. So they told us where to go as far as dormitories and set us up for our living conditions. And we were not told anything at all at this point what we were doing, except we were going to have a job in the plant. So as time went on, we went out to the plant and they showed us what we were going to do. We were going to be filter foremen. So this is, of course, after we were back in civilian clothes. So it was an intriguing experience, and the mystery of it all, and just the air at Oak Ridge was so mysterious, and everyone just seemed to be so interested in doing their patriotic duty. They were just working for something they didn't, most of them, probably 95% didn't know what they were doing, but they were given them a job to do, and they wanted to do it well. It was really a great experience all the way through. So we went on for a period this way and did our job, and we just tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, and we met with the Army once a month. One of the interesting things about the work we did was we had to meet, Tennessee Eastman was operating Y-12, and we had to meet with the Army once a month and pay back the money that Tennessee Eastman was paying us. There was no money transacted, but just a balance sheet of, and then, well, we did have to give some back because we were making more than what the Army was paying us. We had a little allowance. We didn't suffer any. We had a small allowance, but we had to exchange the Tennessee Eastman money for what the Army pay was. But we made some strong relationships, as you might expect, good friends, and we just tried to do our job, and which was important. And I'll have to backtrack a little bit here. In Y-12 area was one of the processes for separating U-235 and U-238. We weren't told any of this, but I can't remember that far back, but someone told me what book to go to, so I went to the bookstore and got this book. He told me Stranson's Particles of Modern Physics, where it described O.E. Lawrence's process for separating 235. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you turn it off a minute? I don't know why somebody, can you turn it off? Well, I'll get it later. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I think I know who that is. What was the last thing I said?
Okay, why don't you start with describing the Caleutrons? You're
Okay.
talking about E.O. Lawrence.
Okay, all right.
I say he was a professor at
Right.
Berkeley.
This book described Lawrence's process for separating 235 and 238 in a small scale. And this was all theory now. No one knew it was going to work. But what they had done, the government, there's General Groves was in charge of this program, and their committee had decided there were 3 different processes to separate the 235 and 238, which they needed. And bear in mind that at this time they didn't know it was going to work. They just had a theory. They needed material to make an experimental trial, make a trial bomb. So everything was moving forward. I'm trying to say is everything was moving ahead at one time. Had to build a city, infrastructure, the whole thing, and we started. General Groves had picked this area, 59,000 acres in Tennessee, which was an ideal spot because it had the power. So they were building the buildings and putting the equipment in, not knowing really what they were going to end up with, but fortunately it did. So at their first building, they had some problems, and it turned out to be a lot of them were mechanical and problems in the manufacture of the Caleutrons that they had to send them back to Milwaukee, and there was a period of time here where they had to shut the plant down. And it so happened my wife was being trained, my wife-to-be, we were not married at the time. I had met her here at Oak Ridge, but she was sent to school to learn how to operate these Caleutrons. So after they thought this possibly could have been some sabotage involved, so that's why they really brought us in, the Army, and put us back in civilian clothes to have a job in the plant to oversee this part of this process, the cooling process for the Caleutrons. So after we were all set up in our jobs and things got back up running again, we corrected their problems that they had found, and I still contend that nothing happened after that, so they just forgot about us and left us there. But we continued on our work of working shift work, and just trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, and continued in this manner for, well, I was there probably over a year on this job.
How did you feel about working with other people? Did other people suspect that you were?
Well, that was a touchy point, especially after I'd met Alice. She was a cubicle cubicle operator, and the girls that worked for her were wondering what Alice was doing, dating a 4F. 4F, for those that don't know, are the unsuitable for military service. She wondered what she was doing dating a man like that. So she got a little heat on that. But it really wasn't, people didn't think anything about it really, because there were other people doing the same job. Working in the plants. It was just, as I say, electrifying atmosphere that everyone was just interested in. We were told it was an important job and not to talk about it. It was very secret. But the relationships were also great. There was unbelievable cooperation in anything you want to do, as far as the plant, especially in the plant. I remember some of my bosses in the plant, if we had to shut down, they kind of knew there was something a little different about us. In fact, one of them went down through the logbook. We had to log in every time we came in to work, and he would go down and see our names, and he'd pick out each one of us. It started out, we were working, 4 of us on a building, and there were 4 of us in civilian clothes, and he could pick out by the signatures. He said, these boys went to college. So he was suspicious, but he didn't say anything. The only one that knew about us was the superintendent of the building, and he knew who we were. In fact, at one point, he called me in the office. He said, we've got a problem. We had made up a resume to apply for this job, make everything look normal, and I'd written up a resume, but our last job, it looked better if we had someone here in Knoxville. So I had picked out a company in the phone book that it was a chemical company, and Fulton Sifflin, as I remember. And he said, they don't have any record of you. So the personnel was starting to investigate a little bit. Anyways, they got that calmed down. He said, we'll get that straightened out. That was one of the little incidents that came up. But other than that, people didn't really pay much attention to us. They might have thought about, why are these young men here? Because we were looked healthy. And but then along came Alice. She was a forelady, as I mentioned, in the cubicle, and we started dating, and couldn't keep a secret from her too long after we started going together. And that's when she started to realize that people were looking at her too, wondering what she was doing dating. But we enjoyed a good life. And then the battle, nothing really eventful came along. As I say, I think they kind of forgot about us because everything was fine. They hadn't had any more problems, and they were meeting their schedule, their production schedule, I assume. But it was just a fascinating and a really an important part of my life, because it was really the first job I ever had, and I was getting experience working with men there. And these were all men that were local people, and they had interesting stories. One experience I remember having came New Year's Eve, and they were used to having a big time wherever they were working, while they were used to having a few drinks, and so they brought their moonshine into the plant. Oh, that was, of course, a no-no. But I knew I had lived with these men for all year long, so I tried not to be obnoxious and let them have their fun. I was glad when that night was over. But as I say, we made a lot of good friendships, and we were so thrilled and so exhilarated when they dropped the bomb and everything came out in the open. It was just a wild time at Oak Ridge. It was unbelievable how the excitement that was released when they found out what was going on here, and it was just such a great experience all the way around. It's just hard to describe, really.
Do you remember there's a photograph that Westcott took of people holding a newsprint?
Oh yes, I have that.
Can you describe that?
Well, all I remember is people just driving up and down the road, honking and hollering and shouting, and it was just like a New Year's Eve 10 times over. It was just a wild experience. People were just letting out all this energy all at one time, and being so happy it was over, especially those that have loved ones overseas. And I've had, since that time, I've heard from so many people, men. I belonged to a World War II roundtable, and several of them have said, we were on our way to Japan when they dropped the bomb, and they turned around and sent us home. And it just saved so many lives, even though it was unfortunate having to use it, but it did save a lot of lives of Japanese people and our men. And I'm just glad now that we're able to get together, and it's been a real great experience. I can't think of anything else, Sandy.
What did you think about preserving some of the properties at Oak Ridge, some of the
I think it's great what this organization is doing, the Atomic Heritage
How do
Foundation.
you start again, since we interrupted? So Atomic Heritage Foundation.
I think it's great what they're doing, and also the other
They
organizations.
can use the name, I don't care.
Okay.
But they won't know, they won't hear my question.
Oh, okay. And other organizations, such as we're having this reunion here at Oak Ridge for the 60th anniversary of it, and we're hearing some from veterans that have great stories to tell. And it's, I've met one of my old friends. He's the only one of our group of 12 or 14 that we work together. We're the only two that we know of that are left. And it's been a great experience to sit down and talk all our experiences over again. He met his wife here. He'll tell you his story this afternoon.
Were there any sort of ironic things that happened, or other funny stories that you remember?
Just on the spur of the moment, all little things happen along the way. I remember one time when Alice and I were out on a date, and I was taking her home. But as soon as I left her at her dormitory and went back to the bus stop or whatever, you were noticed, you were watched. They didn't like to see any unusual things going on, like a single man out that time of night. And so I think they questioned me what I was doing out and this sort of thing. There was very, very close surveillance. The common story we thought was, we don't know who we're talking to. We figured there was FBI here, CIC. We were part of CIC, but we didn't know any others. We were counterintelligence also, but there was every type of enforcement agency, surveillance, security. Security was so tight. It was just unbelievable. You couldn't be hanging around a bus station or any place and not be picked up and questioned. And it was, my wife had experience of trying to take a picture. She'd had a camera, and boy, they caught, she was just in her own backyard in the dormitory, and before she knew it, she said there were 3 or 4 patrol cars there, and took her camera and took her film, and it was just, the atmosphere was electrifying, really, because everyone knew there was an important job to do, and they were just glad to do it, and did everything they could. The harmony was just unbelievable. There's no dissension. Anything you did, it was just a great feeling.
So what did you do for fun?
Well, we'd go into Knoxville and go bowling. A couple of us get together. That was I think one of our main activities, or just getting together, and if we got 2 or 3 of us, we'd discuss what we were doing among ourselves. And like I said, it only took us about a couple months. We pretty much figured out what was going on because of a book I'd gotten and described Lawrence's process, so we understood what it was. And after we figured that out, well, a couple of us had cars, and we'd work on them. Maybe played a little tennis. We'd tried just lead normal lives when we weren't working. We had our 8-hour shifts. We'd on our long weekends, we'd go to Gatlinburg and do this. Had our fun that way.
Did you said you figured out what the Calutrons were doing? Did you know that the end result was to produce a bomb?
Well, being of technical background, most of us were. We realized. Well, in my mind, I went through the ancient chemical study history books tell us that they were wanted to turn lead into gold. So it's transmutation of elements. Well, that's a little bit far-fetched, but actually we were doing some of that with uranium. We were converting it into getting this 235 to make the bomb. And there have been articles I had read. In fact, I went back in my notes from high school, and I had written a little paper on the energy that could be released from atoms, which I forgot about that. But I had written from Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, and some of the science magazines. So I had an inkling of what could be done, yes.
Did you talk about that with your fellows?
We did, and also a couple of the men were married, and they worked in offices, and they gave us a few clues. We got some little help along the way. Not too much. But of course, we didn't know any of the details, or we wouldn't have been able to tell anybody enough to be of any danger to the process. But we did talk among ourselves whenever we could, very quietly. But it was a different life. I mean, after being in the Army for most of it had been at least 9 months maybe, and going back to being closed was a big change for us. Oh, and then of course after when the VJ Day came, and they put us back in uniform right away, and this was a revelation for Alice. She enjoyed that because then she could show her girls that she wasn't dating a 4F. That was a big time for her, and we went through the normal process after we left here, discharged. Some have got jobs. In fact, Hal will tell you about his job. He stayed here a while longer, but I went on home. Well, it was right after that we got married, after I was discharged. And I went to Florida. Alice had gone to Florida to be with his sister. And we were married down there. But all in all, it was a big part of my life, and there's nothing really more significant, I'd say, in my life that happened to me than being at Oak Ridge and being a part of the Y-12 and working with the Manhattan Project and work with you're doing in the Atomic Heritage Foundation. I think it's great. In fact, the World War II group that I belong to in Atlanta, Roundtable, their mission is to keep alive the memory of World War II and get their stories just like you're doing, to keep it alive for their next generation, because they just aren't aware of what happened in World War II. And of course, this was a big part of it.
Can I ask you once again to talk about the actual properties? You know, whether you think it's significant that there be some properties that remain from the Manhattan Project.
Properties.
That is somebody here?
Well, just to say Big Shepherd's here, we also need to change the table outside.
Oh, you can change.
I'm sorry.
Okay, good.
Yeah, he's been here since.
Well, maybe that's.
Thanks.
I guess what we're trying to do is create a national
Acquire
museum
other.
and have maybe the Y-12 Calutron building preserved. It's almost a museum now, and so that 100 years from now, people can see what this looks like, what it did, and have that complement. But have something of the physical reality of this huge plant, that we spent billions producing. So when you they won't hear my question. So try to think about saying.
This will be the first time that I'll be back in the building, and I'd like to see it preserved for future generations to see what we were doing there. I have no idea whether the racetrack that's pictured in this book here, whether it's still there in Y-12. I don't know. I'm hoping to find out today. We're going to see the Beta, which was a complement to this building. I'd never been in a Beta building before, but yes, I think it's great that we should hold on to what we got. We probably lost some already, but especially the stories like you're trying to do now is preserve those as much as possible and get all these pieces of information together for future generations. I think it's a great idea. Our roundtable in Atlanta, that's their mission, is to go out of the schools and give talks, and if they had some film or some DVDs to show, I'm sure it would be of help to show what needs to be preserved. I think it's great what you're doing.